The next session we're going to do is tools in the toolbox. Fancy name, not so fancy content. So what I'm going to be going over first is basically triggers of when actions can happen. So if you were sitting through the day one session, I talked about how in the new Creator 5 stuff, we're going to have basically a different way of reimagining how workflows are kind of organized. But since that's coming soon and you have what you have right now, we want to make sure that everybody understands the different ways scripts that Taylor talked about earlier and that we're going to be talking about throughout the day can be triggered in your application. So scripts happen whenever information is interacted with a form, right? So forms collect your information, and at any time during that process of gathering the information and storing it in your Creator application, it can trigger a script. So your general workflow or process of how information goes into your application is basically somebody opens up a form, they fill out some fields, and then the record is saved. So generally we have three primary triggers for when you want to write scripts: on load, on user input, and on success. On load is basically when the form first loads, you click on the link or you click on the tab, however you got to this form. Before the form is even rendered, we want to do some stuff, right? So sometimes maybe you want to hide a field when the form is first loaded. You want to pre-populate some information when the form is first loaded. And maybe you want to do some more complicated stuff, which we'll talk about throughout the day. But it's basically things that happen before the user does anything at all. The next step is filling out individual fields of information. So if I enter an email address and I tab out of that next box or click onto the next box, sometimes you'll see a little spinning circle on the right-hand side of that box. That means there's some script running in the background, and we can have actions happen like that. So if I enter some address information, maybe I want to reformat it into like USPS format. Or maybe I enter a phone number and I want to make sure it's a valid phone number. Or based on your phone number, I want to say, or what's your city based on the area code of your phone number. Different things like that, and we'll run through some examples later in the afternoon on data validation stuff. But basically, once someone enters some information, we want to make some calculation, so on user input of a field. And last, and probably the most common one of when scripts are used, is on success. Basically, once the information is actually saved into your Creator application, we want to do some stuff. Most popularly, you probably want to send an email. Maybe you want to update some other information in your application somewhere. But basically, just some calculations that are happening after the person clicks submit, and everything is saved perfectly fine. But one thing that's really underappreciated that sticks right in the middle of these two is something called on validate. So on validate is super important, and after looking through all Creator applications, we see that on validate doesn't have as much activity as it probably should, and a lot of people are doing validation actions actually at the success stage. So we're pretty sure people just don't know what validate means. So that's what I'm here to teach you, what on validate means. Basically what that means is once someone clicks the submit button, before anything actually gets saved inside the database itself, we want to do some checks. We want to make sure maybe the person hasn't registered for a one-on-one already, for example. Maybe you want to make sure all the data is formatted properly before it's actually saved. So actions that you want to have happen to make sure the data that's going in is in pristine condition and matches all sorts of criteria that you have in mind for that application. And then you go ahead and move on to the on success script. So on validate is super important. Everybody should be using it. So now you know what it is and you can start using it. Similarly to when somebody opens a form for the first time, we have a different workflow for when someone edits a form. So when you edit a form, you basically are looking at a list view report or a calendar report that Arun covered yesterday. And when you click on the little pencil icon on the left of a record, click edit, there's a whole different workflow that happens. Sometimes the things you want to have happen when someone's adding information is different than the workflow of when someone is editing information. So for example, since most of the people here are signed up for one-on-ones, when you sign up for a one-on-one, the form that loads for what you people see is different than the form that the one-on-one guys upstairs see when they edit the record and say the session has been completed. So based on different workflows like that, you have different actions such as hiding and showing fields, populating things, and different actions like that. But the same flow pretty much applies. Whenever a record is loaded when you edit it, whenever you click submit or update basically on edit really, and it gets validated, and then whenever the change is actually saved in the table, you have another trigger. One thing that causes a little bit of confusion, I guess I'll tell you the confusion thing in a second. I'll just move to delete next. So Deleting is another thing that doesn't really get the love that it probably has. Most people don't really have on delete scripts, and that's really not that good. So when you click the delete button for any record, you can trigger scripts to happen. And there's two ways you can do it. One is the onValidate again, which basically means once you click the delete button, some criteria has to be satisfied before the record is actually successfully deleted. So generally you want to make sure that that information is properly saved somewhere. Maybe you want to actually delete the record from the main table you're working with and store it in some archive table somewhere else. Maybe you want to make sure the person has the right permission set. Maybe you want to make sure that if someone has a pending order, you don't delete that record and they're not able to do it. So you could say that if someone clicks on the delete button and if their order is pending, then you're unable to delete it, so you can cancel the deletion process at that validate stage. And then last is once something is successfully deleted, you might want to trigger some script. Most people don't use this very much either, but generally, I don't really know too often, once something's deleted, it's pretty much gone. So you can send an email and kind of keep a secondary copy of that data if you want to, but it's more so to maybe keep a better audit trail of who's doing what in the system. You can easily write an email script that's going to say, once something is deleted, shoot the admin an email saying the logged in user, deleted this record. So if you need to get mad at somebody down the line, you know exactly who did what. So breaking it all down into one pretty slide with a bunch of pictures and stuff is the blue section is when someone's adding a record for the very first time in a form. The orange-ish, orange, beige, whatever. Middle one is whenever a field is updated, and then the red is obviously delete just because that looks scary. One thing that's really confusing to a lot of people is this second column right here. Whenever someone's filling out fields, on user input versus on update. What's the difference? Anyone know the difference? So when it changes actual values. So the reason this is super important is, let's say you have a script that's run that basically says, normally people would do this. You have an order process, because that's the easiest thing to imagine, and you have statuses for that order. So you have something like an open order, a pending order, and let's say shipped and canceled. 4 simple statuses for any order, right? So maybe you want to send a confirmation email when something is shipped, right? So normally most people would say that, hey, look, whenever something is edited and on edit, on success, generally where the script would probably go, you say if the status is, shipped, send this email. But if this order record has a bunch of other information in it, every time I make a change, every time on success, it's going to trigger because that criteria of status equals shipped is going to be met. So then you're going to end up sending 10 shipping notifications rather than just 1. So the on update means whenever that individual field changes values, and then it meets that criteria. So generally you would put your things like status changes or a drop down, something that progresses along a timeline, those fields in the on update section, because they'll only get triggered when that field specifically changes values, versus normally most people put it on success and that criteria will be met every single time. Does that kind of make sense? All right, system variables. So in Creator, whenever you have a script action happen, there's things like system variables, which are basically variables that we predefine for you that are dynamic based on different situations. So the most common one is definitely current date and current time. So basically every time you use zoho.currentTime, it will get the current time that the person is accessing that form. Same thing with the date, it'll just give you the date value instead. So today's the 31st, I think, so it'll show the 31st on both current date and current time. There's a couple other nifty ones out there, like login user ID, admin user, and admin user ID. Admin user is generally used when you're sending emails and stuff like that. So if you have an email script, it'll come from the admin user 9 out of 10 times. One, tip I'll kind of give you guys, if you make an account and you're sending out emails, you probably realize, all right, well, I'll tell you a learning pain. If you sign up for a one-on-one, you got an email from my name. The number of people that came up to me and said, are you doing my one-on-one, was insane, because the email, everybody thinks it's coming from me because I'm the administrator. So there's actually a feature where you can add an email. I don't think we even talk about this, so I can just show you real quick. So how many people have a problem with all the emails coming from the admin and you just kind of wish it came from somebody else? Right? Super annoying. Let me show you how we can fix that. So it's a little hidden setting, because if we made it too easy, then it would not be good. Notification. So let me zoom in a little bit. When you click from, you have the option to add an email address. Chances are you probably never knew this thing existed. So if you click on add email address, you get this box that moves around, and you enter an email address, let's say zaholics@zohocorp.com or some admin at so-and-so.com or whatever. Enter that email address. We're going to send a verification code to that email address to prove it's just yours and you're not trying to spoof someone else. And it's like a 4-digit thing or whatever, so you type in your PIN number back in here, and it'll let you send emails because now you verified another email address you can send it from. Therefore, I don't have to send one-on-one confirmations from my email address. I can send it from some generic thing that people don't blow me up on. In hindsight, I probably should have done that, but because the setting was so hidden, I forgot to even do this. But yeah, growing pains. No one's perfect. So, emails in Creator. Just emails in general, I can give you like a high-level thing. Whenever we send emails from Creator or from any Zoho service, really, 9 out of 10 times, unless it's Zoho campaigns pretty much, we're sending it from our own mail servers, and we're basically spoofing your email address as the sender. So, pros and cons of this. Con is that, especially internal filters, if you have like a high security level, especially on like Exchange servers and stuff like that, you're receiving an email from something that looks like zohocorp.com, but it was actually sent from another server, which basically raises a red flag in most spam filtration systems and prevents it from actually getting delivered. Bigger problem for internal emails versus external emails to the outside world, but I would definitely suggest if you have a crazy IT policy and super strict rules like that, we do have IP addresses that can be white labeled for receiving emails that verify it. So yeah, it's kind of an issue, but there actually is what's called transactional APIs, transactional mail APIs, where you can push off the sending mail function to some third-party service that will then verify your domain and do a lot more on the email side of things. Again, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. So running through this, Zoho.IP address I already mentioned. Most of the time people don't care about what IP address is there, but like I said, it can be used in certain situations. And then these two are probably the two more underappreciated system variables, app name and app URI. So a lot of times if you're sending a link to something, let's say you're sending an email notification with a link to a report or something like that. If that original application gets cloned or changed, or you change the title or you change the name, basically you might have had that link hard-coded in there, like you copy and pasted from the URL, what the application's URL kind of is. Here, if you use the variable for app URI, you can basically have it dynamically generated based on that. So if I have Karen's Cooking Class app v1 as my first application, and then I clone it and create Karen's Cooking Class app v2, then instead of having to go through and change all those URLs, it'll automatically just, generate the URL based on the Zoho.app URI. It's a very helpful feature if you're doing multiple apps, kind of useless if you're not. Couple things coming soon. Quotes on the soon. Login location, login device, added location, added device. You didn't hear it from me, but it's going to be super cool. So soon, if you're loading on the iPhone, you can change different workflows. If people are adding things from a tablet, you can do different workflows. And then added location, we're basically going to have an address field that captures either browser location or mobile device location, so we know exactly where someone's adding things from, and then it's saved in the database. So for people who've been using Creator for a long time, the location thing is crazy. Device, location, crazy, because now you can have a lot of different scripts based on where someone's actually accessing the application. You go to a customer site, when it loads the form, it can show dynamic information based on the customer's location that they're at. When you save it, it'll be checked into there. You can have different validations in place. It's super, super cool. When you have a field, you have a field name and a deluge name. So basically, imagine this was your address field, how was your lesson, and it would be how was your lesson dot street address, or line 1, dot line 2, dot city, dot state, dot zip, dot lat, dot long. So we store it all. So we take the actual lat long, we reverse geocode it, store an address for easy access, and we also store the original lat long, so you don't have to go to some third-party service and re-geocode it on your own. Next thing we're going to talk about is functions. So running off of Taylor's little session example from before on math skills, everybody remember what functions are from like trigonometry? If you had a graphing calculator back in college or high school, you might have remembered this. You type in the function of x equals x squared, and you get this pretty little parabola. And if you went into calculus, you'd have to do all sorts of other integrals and stuff like that. But on a basic level, you take an x value, and here you got x equals -2. You plug it in the left, and you plug it in the right. So you say the function of -2 is -2 squared, and everybody knows -2 squared is 4, right? We know -2 squared is 4. We know that? Yeah. All right, cool. So this is kind of what a function is. You take some value, you put it inside on the left-hand side, and then that value is then used in the equation on the right-hand side, and some calculation is happening. Since people don't really seem very passionate about this example, I'll make it a little bit more relatable. So if you've ever grew up, you know about Street Fighter. And the Hadouken is probably the most common move that like almost anybody cheated with. And basically, in order to do it, you would press down, down, forward, and right, and then the punch button. And once you punch this in this exact order in a short enough amount of time, he would go spit out this little blue ball. So your input is actually those 4 sets of buttons in that specific order, and your output is this blue fireball that was very hard to jump over. So you don't really know how it works. You have no idea how pressing down, forward, and a punch somehow makes blue stuff come out of this guy's hands, but somehow that mechanism makes it work. So functions are kind of like black boxes. Sridhar talked about it a little bit in his session on, what was it, Tuesday now? Yeah, Tuesday. You don't really need to know how they work. You just need to know that you put something in there, some magical calculation happens, and then something nice comes out that makes your life a little bit easier. So inside Creator and inside Delusion in general, we have a bunch of different built-in functions. So these are things that help you execute everyday tasks, and instead of having to recalculate everything all the time, I guess, basically. So long story short, you input some information, and they return something else. So I'll keep running and show you an example here. So I'll just run through that real quick. But here's a couple examples of a built-in function. So here you got the variable named pi, which Taylor talked about a little bit earlier, and we give it the value 3.14159. And when you do pi.round, and then you put 0 in, so 0 is the argument that's going inside of that function, it's going to round it to 0 decimal places, so the number 3 flat. If you put round and then you put 1 in between, it's going to round it to 1 decimal place. So it'll take 14159, round it to 3.1. If you don't understand how rounding works, I can't help you with that, but if you understand this much, then you'll see how you don't have to create some crazy concatenation script to basically do rounding. It's all pre-built for you. So mostly it's about data manipulation is what most of these functions are. Here you got a date field, and date fields are a little bit difficult to work with. It's actually a date time field because there is a time at the end of it. But we got a function called getDay, getMonth, and basically that gets the actual day number out of there, and it gets the month number out of there. So you can see here it actually converted the AUG word into the number 8. So depending on whatever date format you have in your application, which can be pretty much anything, if you come into application settings and date format, we have to have the longest list of date formats in the world. All right, we give you every option under the sun to create dates however you want them to look. But sometimes they are a little bit difficult to work with. So generally, if you're doing a lot of date manipulations, which a couple examples of a little bit later, it's good to put them all in number format and then have them re-render however you want to at the end of the day. So basically things like getDay, getMonth, these are all things that you enter the, original value, you execute the function on it, and in this case, there is no parameter going inside because getDay doesn't really have anything. You're just getting the day. Some arguments don't have, or some functions don't have arguments that go inside. Some are just executed on their own. Versus something like addDay at the bottom, you put a number 1 in there, it's going to add 1 day to August 31st. If you put 2 days in there, it's going to do September 2nd. Pretty straightforward, right? So then we have date functions, we have number functions like rounding, and then we have dates where you get the numbers and adding information to it. Text manipulation is super important. So Taylor covered a little bit more about adding Bruce and Wayne, and then you get Bruce Wayne with no space in it, then you get a space, but you also get things like moving things to uppercase or lowercase if you want to, getting the suffix of something. So here if I put the suffix of the word Zoho, basically it's going to give me creator, but it's also going to give me this little space in between. So I don't know if you can really tell, but there should be a space, like creator should be off to the right a little bit. So it'll give me everything after the word Zoho and the last O ends, everything after that with the exclamation point. And if you get the prefix of Zoho, it gives you I love, and you can't really see the space bar after love, but trust me, it's there. Then you got a couple more string functions. You can do replacing things. So if I want to replace creator with software, I don't know why you would, but I guess you do. You change the word creator, that's case sensitive, so you change that word, replace it with software, and then you can put it that way. Same way, you can check if something contains a word, so you do contains, and then the original string, which is I love creator. If it contains the word Zoho, it comes back as true. If it doesn't contain it, it comes back as false. Then you also got something called length. So length is how many characters long something is. A character is, I is a character, a space is a character, L is a character, every single one of these things inside here. Let's just say a keyboard press is a character. I'm defining that now. A keyboard press is a character. So every single one of those keyboard keys inside there is one character. So this thing is 20 things long. And it's really good to find out how long something is. I have an example of making sure a phone number is 10 digits in America, and if it's not, then we'll make sure that, they enter a valid 10-digit phone number so we can contact them. So functions can be stackable. This is also a super important concept. Basically, what you want to do, or what we can do, is we can put it all in one line. Normally, you would have two lines that say string.toUppercase, and then you reassign string.toUppercase that has now been put into uppercase, then you get the suffix of it. So in this case, you've put it to uppercase, so everything is uppercase, and then you get the suffix of Zoho, so it goes sequential. There is a space there, it's very hard to see. I moved everything into uppercase here, so everything went all caps lock, and then I said get the suffix of Zoho, but there wasn't actually a suffix of Zoho. So it didn't really match up. Let's see, we got a little exercise. So we've got an exercise, and basically, in Karen's cooking class, whenever someone adds a new lesson, so for example, I come in here and I go into the application. Whenever I'm adding a new lesson that I want to teach, it'll have a start time. So I say I'm going to teach a new class, and it's going to be on September 5th at, let's say, 4:30 and 30 seconds for some reason. And I'll skip it. And now if I enter duration and say it's a 60-minute class, I want the end time to automatically populate. Fair enough? I shouldn't have to type that in because it's pretty basic based on start time and duration. It goes into end time. I would have you all do it yourself, but since the answer's right here, I'll make you guys do the harder example just because it seems like an advanced crowd. So here, the actual answer is we do a conditional, like Taylor covered earlier, if, and then we got these two null checks. So null checks are super important because if I didn't do a null check, if the duration wasn't empty, or actually was empty, or the start time was empty, then this entire inside condition wouldn't work. So I have to make sure that both of these actually have something in them, some number in the date duration field and some value in the start time field. And if both of those fields have actual values in there and are not blank, then we can go and do the calculation and say the end time equals a start time, add minutes, and then we put the duration inside there. The very first time a field is used doesn't exist. Once it gets some value, now it's a double quote situation. Like I mentioned, I got an example that I can show you a script, but basically sometimes, how many people use phone numbers in their forms or have a phone number field somewhere in their form? Almost everybody. All right. All right, so hence the reason for coming up with the phone number in the new Creator 5, but since you guys don't have that yet and it'll be coming soon, we will assume that you're probably using it a single line or a number field. Single line is probably the most common thing to use. Number field makes sense in theory to capture the information, but the problem is number fields generally frustrate people because you have to really put in the field description saying enter numbers only, don't put dashes. Some people are not the brightest people. They'll put parentheses and dashes and spaces and all sorts of periods and weird things like that. So number field kind of constrains it all together. But in the single line field, you can actually let them make the formatting mistake that they want to really make. And instead, once they enter information, so on user input of the phone number field, you can actually have a script like this. So this is a stackable script, and I went 3 levels deep. It's like scriptception or something like that. And we went the input phone number. Then we have a function called getAlphaNumeric. Any idea what getAlphaNumeric does? Gets the alphabets, alpha, and the numbers, numeric, and it gets rid of everything else. Every space, every dash, every parentheses, everything else, it all goes away. So once you remove all those, then sometimes we got people who might put a letter in a phone number field. I don't know why they do it, but you'd be surprised at the type of people that enter stuff into forms. So just to be safe, we got to remove all the alphabetic letters too. The reason you got to stack these is because we don't actually have a function that says get numeric out of a string. It just doesn't exist. So we kind of got to stack these if you want to get the numbers out of a field that has mixed amounts of information. And the very last thing is now that I've removed all the alphabets, all the non-letters and numbers in the field value, I just get the length of it. And if the length is less than 10, it'll say include an area code. And basically the reason it's less than 10, it could also be less than or equal to 9, if you put it that way. whatever condition you really want to put, but less than 10 just makes the most sense. All right, so renaming a field. You can actually convert a date field into a string, and if you put a parameter in here, we have a help guide that shows all the different parameters you can put inside here. But based on what you put inside these double quotes, it'll convert it into that date format. So here you got 31 Aug. If you put 4 M's, you get the full name written out. 3 M's, you get the word August. 1 M, you get the 8. If you put 2 little M's, you would have gotten 08. If you put 1 little h, you get the number 1. It all kind of works out. All right, so last thing, reformat. I'm going to keep this as an example for you guys. If you use a date field in your forms, you probably are annoyed because in America we use AM, PM, and in the rest of the world we use 24-hour date formats. And so if you want to convert your date time field from being stored as a 24-hour format but displayed in 12-hour format, we got this simple little script here, and again, it gets emailed out to you. But basically, it's going to take the actual time that's coming in and convert it into a better format, add an AM, PM, colon, makes it look pretty for you. Very simple. Whew. Last thing, making your own functions. So those are all pre-built functions, and what we're going to be talking about a little bit later is using existing functions on your own. But like we talked about functions before, you name a function, you give it some inputs like we used before, there's a calculation part and an output. So a couple of slides will walk you through how to make a function, and we'll walk through all this a little bit more in detail about the debugging session. But when you create a function or you're executing a function, there is a value that is returned to you, right? So if you're saying, get me the alphanumeric, it's going to return a string that has alphanumeric. It's not going to return a date field with alphanumeric characters, right? So when you write a function, you establish what the value that's going to be coming out of that calculation is. So there are different field types for every single, or different return types for every data type and creator. And then the one with the star next to it, void, basically means I want to put information into this function, have it execute some stuff, but I don't need to send that information out anywhere. It just needs to run and calculate something, and that's pretty much the end of the world, or end of purpose. So this is an example of a function that I wrote myself. I give it a return type of whatever I want, a function name, a data type of an input, and the actual input name, and then I do some calculations. So in Taylor's example of first name, last name, I could have said input a first name, input a last name, and then we'll take those two values that are input into this function, put them together, add a space in between them, and return the string value of name that happens. Just a couple of slides on how to go into this. We'll have examples on the whole thing. This is a little function that lets you calculate the area of a circle. If you don't remember, I put the formula for you. But just an example here. This is probably a bad example because this should have said not string, because I don't want to return a string. I probably want to return a decimal. So it would have been the area of a circle. Once you put in a radius, you multiply the radius squared times 3.14, technically 159 all the way down, but I just made it simple for you. And then you return the area here.
Let's give a nice round of applause for Tejas.